Sorry to interrupt everybody's dinner. I've been told by the management of the club that there's too much fun in this room. We need to tone it down a little bit. No, seriously, I hope everybody enjoyed their meal and got to visit with people, not just at their table, but at other tables. It's an incredible gathering of people from all walks of Wall Street, and particularly deep in the different parts of the fixed income markets. The dessert and coffee should come shortly if you haven't received it already. Before I introduce our Master of Ceremonies, Robin Wigglesworth, I want to remind everyone about FIASI's mission and our key activities. For those who are not aware, we've been around since the 1980s and we'll be having a grand 50th anniversary celebration in 2025. We provide an independent and unbiased forum for the debate of all topics related to the fixed income markets, be they qualitative or quantitative, be they municipal or emerging markets, domestic, global. FIASI does not lobby or take sides in the debates it encourages, and that's a very important consideration in terms of our DNA and our emphasis. We also sponsor unique networking and mentoring for professionals of all ages. And if your organization does not have a tie into FIASI, I encourage you to do that for the benefit of the youth in your organization, because mentoring is hugely important, not just within your organization, but from without. And we also, as you all know, because you're here tonight, we recognize and celebrate leaders from all walks of the business. They can be in academia, they can be on the buy side, on the sell side, issuers, regulators, all walks of the business that help to create the fabric that is the global fixed income markets. And so FIASI plays a unique role, an important role, and that one that we've been doing for 50 years and we look forward to do for the next 50. Please take a look at the event brochure that was on your seat that explains some of the past and future events that we have hosted recently. We take particular pride in the women in fixed income and the sustainable finance pillars of our programming agenda. These provide wonderful opportunities for all the organizations in this room to put forward speakers or panelists if you want to raise their profiles or raise your own firm's profile. So this year we've pivoted our Hall of Fame ceremony format to something new, welcoming a fantastic Master of Ceremonies in Robin Wigglesworth. He was chosen for a number of reasons, not the least of which is his ability to command a large room. Robin is a long-standing financial journalist with a stellar reputation at leading firms, in particular the Financial Times and Bloomberg. His writing style, if you're not familiar, is really smart. It's deep and it's insightful. Currently, with FT Alphaville, it's considered a must-read by investors of all stripes around the globe. He also had a stint here in the US as editor of the FT, where he got to know many of you in the room and two of our 3 honorees. And also of direct relevance to tonight, he's a renowned author, having penned the bestseller Trillions in 2021, and is currently working on something very important related to the fixed income markets and their importance. I'll let him talk a little bit more about that, but without further ado, please join me in welcoming Mr. Robin Wigglesworth.
Thank you very much, Mark. I thought you said you weren't going to make me blush with your introduction. Yes, I'm Robin Wigglesworth. I'm here from the Financial Times. I'm very glad that you let some journalists into the room. I've got a couple of colleagues here that wanted to join in. First of all, I should obviously say thank you for inviting me, Mark, and the rest of the FIASI crew. I gather this is the first time you've had an external Master of Ceremonies, which sounds very grand. That makes it even more special for me. But really clinched it for me to dump 3 young kids on my very, very patient wife in Oslo, Norway, and fly out here just for this event, was the quality of the inductees. You know, I've been lucky enough to know Bob and Barbara for a while now, and I've been a big fan of Steve's work for a long time without really knowing it, as I imagine quite a lot of you people in the room are as well. So it's truly a privilege to be part of their induction. And despite being a journalist, I feel I'm a little bit among friends here, Because I'll admit something, as much as Mark talked about, we have people from all walks of capital markets here. I'm a fixed income journalist at heart. That was my first love, and as Cat Stevens sang, the first cut is the deepest. And I know equities gets a lot of the mainstream love and attention, but everybody here knows that bonds, fixed income, that's where it's at. Bonds are cool. As a bond person once told me, and I love this, he felt sorry, he pitied equities people because they will never know the pure feeling of getting a bond repaid on time. That's a pristine feeling. I haven't felt it myself, unfortunately, but give it time. As Mark sort of hinted, I'm writing a book on the entire history of the bond market because I think it's such an awesome story. And I'm glad to say because of the research I've started doing around this book, we were able to bring the world's oldest living bond here tonight. Some of you might have seen it downstairs. It's, I was going to say it's almost as old as Bob, but it is actually 399 years old, 400 years old next year, around January. So I'll tell you a little story about it because it's pretty special, because this is a living bond. It still pays interest. So 400 years ago, around Christmas, ice on the River Lek, it's an outskirt of the what's the big river in Netherlands called again? The Rhine. Yes, it's a cut from the Rhine. The ice broke free and smashed through some of the dikes on the River Lek. And most of you might know the Netherlands is largely underwater, so this was disastrous. Huge area of the country was flooded very quickly, and the water almost made it all the way down to Amsterdam. But luckily, the Dutch were really smart, brilliant pioneers of finance as well. So they knew what to do. They sold a bond. The local water board, and I'm sorry if any Dutch speakers here, I'm probably going to butcher this, the Hugenraadschap Lekdik Bovendams, sold 1,200 Carolus guilders worth of bonds to a local merchant, a wealthy woman in Amsterdam, called Elsken Jorisdochter. 1,200 Carolus guilder. So for this money, to repair the dike, in 1624, the water board promised Jorisdochter 2.5% interest rate forever. So for her descendants, whoever bought the bonds, would get 2.5% forever. And the dike is still there. You can actually go see this outside a town called Houten. The entity that issued the bond, the legal descendants still exist today. It's a water utility in Utrecht. And remarkably, the bond is still paying interest. It first paid its interest in Carolus guilders. Then it paid its interest in Flemish pounds. It then paid its interest in modern guilders, and now finally in euros. So it pays around, I think it was 30 euros a year to its current owner, the New York Stock Exchange. That kindly allowed it to be brought out of its archives in New Jersey, which is quite sad, really. This beautiful thing, this beautiful goatskin bond is stuck in some archives in New Jersey. But they brought it out tonight for you guys. It might still be downstairs if you go down and see it. And I just think it's incredible to think about what this bond has been through. And we're talking, the country known as the Netherlands today, the borders have changed many, many times over those centuries. There have been world wars. I mean, the country was subsumed by Napoleon. There had lots of currencies, several pandemics. And it keeps paying interest. So, sadly, not everybody loves history as much as I do. So you can ask, why do I keep on banging on about this Dutch goatskin bond? And partially it is because I think it's incredibly cool. And I'm afraid if you don't like a 400-year-old living bond that still pays interest today, then we can't be friends. But this bond, this beautiful goatskin bond, I think, is a modern physical manifestation of how the fixed income markets help build the modern world. They have won wars, they have broken countries. They have financed medicines and hospitals and sugar plantations and tobacco farms. It pays for what we watch on Netflix. They've even helped bankroll Manchester United. which I think is an absolute travesty, but since we're friends here, I'll move on for the sake of amity. And today, getting the data on this is a little bit tricky, sadly, but the bond market is almost certain that the bond market is bigger than the bank loan market for the first time in history, since both emerged from Renaissance Italy 1,000 years ago. Think about that, the bond market does more credit extension than the loan market for the first time in history. So one of the things I also do like about the bond market, which I really hammered home when talking to the inductees tonight, outsiders don't often appreciate this, and I think sometimes even insiders forget this, but the bond market is also about people. It's people at the heart. And sure, yeah, the bond market is a little bit mathier than the slack-jawed yokels of the equity market. You guys have a reputation for being a little bit brusque sometimes, a little bit tough, rough around the edges. I'm sure you'll all admit that bond people, fixed income people, are not famous for their outgoing optimism, right? But because maybe perhaps it's because it's an over-the-counter market, I think it's always been a little bit more about relationships, about people, than the anonymous world of equities. And I think you can really tell that even today. I bet most of the people here in this room know each other, right? And I think that's pretty magical. And the bond market is changing, obviously, a lot. To borrow a line from Barbara, she said I could steal this, so I hope she still forgives me, but this is no longer our grandmother's bond market. It's not even Elsken Joris Doctor's bond market, certainly. I've been following the advent and increasing degree of electronification, indexation, and even systematization that would have been unthinkable, frankly, 10 years ago, with, frankly, a little bit of fear and apprehension, but also delight and fascination. But I still think, at the heart, people build this bond market. People knit it together, as Mark said. That is at the heart of its fabric. Every generation, everybody here, and everybody came before us have put another brick on this mighty wall. And that work has been valuable, hugely valuable, for society, for who we are today. I'm sure a lot of you remember when Lloyd Blankfein said that he was just doing God's work. And I actually think, I shouldn't say this as a journalist, I thought he got unfair amount of stick for what was obviously a joke at the time. And I don't think we should discourage people from joking with journalists. That's a sad, bleak world that I don't want to live in. And I am also a strict atheist, but I do think that, slightly tongue-in-cheek, but in a very real sense, that you guys are helping doing God's work. Well-compensated God's work, but God's work nonetheless. This is important. So I'd like you all to raise a glass and maybe salute yourselves for the work you guys have all done over the years, some with more years than others, but what you guys are doing is valuable. So I suddenly realized it's bad luck not to have a glass myself, but I'll just have to indulge a little bit more afterwards. I'm going to introduce the first inductee. And one of the things I really do love about this Hall of Fame is that it does recognize that the market is made up of many different people doing many different types of jobs. And they all together help build the fabric of what we see today. And naturally, investors and traders dominate. There are also academics like Harry Markowitz and Bill Sharp, data providers like some guy, Mike Bloomberg, I think he was called. I think he's done something interesting. Ledgery analysts, we have several in the room today. I was quite thrilled to finally meet Marty Fridson in person, but also Leibowitz. And I mean, it's an honor to be here. I gather also, I know there's one journalist inducted in the Hall of Fame, which I was noted with great interest. So congratulations, Jim, but I'm coming for you. But as a huge fan of indexing, sorry, I love passive investing, I'm not going to lie, I'm very glad that the first inductee today is Mr. Ag himself, Steve Berkley. Yeah. So you have his biography in the book, and you should all read it because it has been a pretty remarkable career before he retired earlier this year. He retired from Bloomberg, which now owns the ag business. Before that, he was at BlackRock and Lehman Brothers. He was a global head of the index business and helped launch the ag back in '73. I think he won the Index Award, Institutional Investors Index Award of the Year for something like 50 years in a row or something. It was something incredible, at least. I mean, it's wild. But just take a moment to think about how hard that would have been back then. I mean, there was no pricing data, no public pricing data. There was no turnover data. Unlike equities, you know, bonds live, they die all the time. It's just incredibly complicated. So the early version of the ag only included treasuries and a few corporate bonds, and I think it was calculated once a month. It's pretty incredible how far we've come. So I think that's pretty special and is very much deserving of being inducted here tonight. So this is the last we'll hear from me until, you know, I'm introducing the next inductees. So brace yourselves, but I'd like to invite Steve up to the podium now. For his remarks. I should also say, now that Steve has retired, come on up, Steve has retired, he can do his other big life project, which is seeing every country in the world. And he's got 167 out of the 193 recognized by the UN, and both South and North Pole, which I think is incredible.
Thank you. Yes, and that's why I consider myself bipolar. So thank you, Robin, for that wonderful introduction. It's one my father would have enjoyed and my mother would believe. I would like to first congratulate my fellow inductees, Barbara and Bob, and offer a hearty thank you to the FIASI board and Hall of Fame members, my family, friends, colleagues, and all those here in attendance this evening. It's truly an honor to be standing here before you. Many of you are aware of my travel fetish, as you just heard, and have listened to my stories repeatedly over the years. There's one more I wish to add to that collection. So I was in Westminster Abbey, moseying about, reading the names of celebrated and worthy individuals buried in the hallowed floor of the Abbey. These included the likes of Isaac Newton, Charles Darwin, Rudyard Kipling, Henry VIII, and of course, Philip Clark. So, who is Philip Clark, you might ask? He was the plumber who faithfully served the Abbey for decades. They included the plumber with real heroes. So as I prepared for the event this evening, I reviewed the list of those in the FIASI Hall of Fame. They included, among others, Mike Bloomberg, Larry Fink, Bill Gross, and Jack Bogle. So then it all hit me. I am the FIASI plumber. But all kidding aside, I've been blessed to have spent most of my career working with amazing people, developing systems, and most notably, fixed income bond indices. When I joined Shearson Lehman Brothers in 1986, after several stints at Grumman Aerospace, Sperry Systems, and Citibank, I was assigned to the nascent index team. I knew nothing about benchmarks, but quickly became involved with the effort to launch the U.S. Aggregate Index. The leading indices at the time were the Salomon Brothers Big Index and the Shearson Lehman Government Corporate. But investors had been using U.S. mortgages to outperform those benchmarks. So working with pension consultants, we built a more representative benchmark, which was quickly adopted by investors, the U.S. Aggregate Index. I use this as one example of how we were able to establish ourselves as the premier fixed income index provider. Markets evolve, and it's critical for products and services to evolve with them. Resting on your laurels results in dead laurels. In my career, the most important factor associated with success has been the exploitation of a new technology. The index used to be calculated but once a month, and it took 5 days to publish. Green bar paper was distributed to the trading desk where traders entered their spreads. It was then brought back to the Edipool where yields, maturity dates, and coupons were manually entered into Monroe calculators. Now, many of you have no clue what a Monroe calculator is, but many of us do. The results were then entered into a mainframe computer system, after which returns were scrutinized and outliers identified. We would then go back to the trading desk and argue over whether their handwritten entries looked like a 1 or a 7. It was like that quote from Woody Allen's movie, Take the Money and Run, which was, "Give me the money, I have a gub." I don't know if you've seen that movie. Anyway, it was wash, rinse, repeat for 5 days. When finally published, a group of admins would handle the distribution of the results via telephones, which would ring all day. The return of the AG is 2.17 and the duration is 6.2 years. The return of the AG is 2.17 and the duration is 6.2 years. It was enough to drive you nuts. So let's fast forward. Index results eventually were made available on Telerate, and ultimately this growing company called Bloomberg. Prices were collected from the desk electronically. Production was moved to PCs and then Sun workstations. Publication times were cut from 5 days to same day. Algorithms and processes were created to better catch anomalies. But the biggest difference was putting portfolio analytics on the desks of clients so that they could compare their holdings to the index and measure their risk. The system at that time used Windows 1.0, and Bill Gates was still a millionaire. In my time at the helm of the USS Index battleship, I witnessed remarkable change. In addition to the technological advances, I've seen the democratization of access to data. What used to be a private club of index users is now open to all. The index families have grown from US investment-grade securities to include other products such as high yield, emerging markets, munis, non-dollar, commodities, crypto, and even equities, among others. Index advisory councils have been established to solicit ideas and opinions from market participants as to how the benchmark should evolve. This concept of shared ownership goes to the heart of the commitment to the industry. Publication frequencies and quality have improved, and the purveyors of these benchmarks have moved from investment banks to data providers and exchanges. And at the heart of this culture is the use of a rules-based methodology which eliminates biases and is now permanently part of the index DNA. There isn't enough time to discuss in detail all the milestones I've been witness to, but my personal list would be the launch of the US AG, the creation of the PC product and its offspring such as Point and Port, European Monetary Union, which led to the creation of the global AG, getting the index up and running after being blown out of the Lehman headquarters during 9/11. And ironically, it was the Bloomberg organization that donated office space to the index team during that time. How sweet is that? Another thing was ringing the bell at the American Stock Exchange for the launch of the first fixed income ETFs with the BGI iShares team. The creation of global index advisory councils, the need for which was actually caused by me flippantly including the initial TIPS security in the index. The market considered that decision to actually be a capital offense. That's a joke. Other milestones include the transition to Barclays after the Lehman failure. And let me note, there are people in this room that walked into Barclays without jobs to keep the index running while others were carrying their boxes out of the Lehman building. The subsequent Braze acquisition by Bloomberg of the Barclays indices was another major milestone, and the inclusion of China in the global AG counts as well. Thinking of all these accomplishments achieved with the hard work of my colleagues makes me beam with pride and also a little sweaty. So what comes next? There is more to do by those now carrying the index torch. I envision the launch of futures products based on real-time fixed income indices, which will radically change the derivatives markets. Artificial intelligence and machine learning will improve the quality of the benchmarks and help portfolio managers better identify opportunities and manage their risk. New ideas and concepts will continually challenge the status quo. For example, the Netflix-like saga regarding ESG is still in season 1 and yet to be finalized. Markets will eventually be open nearly 24/7, and so index calculations will have to be continuous. And governance practices will continue to evolve as regulators become more involved with existing processes. Have fun with that one. There are so many people to thank, and I apologize for not being able to acknowledge them all, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention my competitors at the old Solomon Brothers, Citibank, FTSE, Merrill, ICE, and others for keeping me on my toes. And I would specifically like to thank 2 individuals who have been my partners, actually more like brothers, through this amazing journey. First is Jack Malvey for his ideas and unbounded enthusiasm for this business. And the second is Nick Gendron as we built this franchise over the decade. Nick, please stand up. I also want to acknowledge the amazing job that Mark Howard has done to support the FIASI mission. Thank you, Mark. Well, lastly, I want to thank my wife of 41 years for putting up with all the late hours, my travel and time away from our family. I promise you that those literally 12 million accrued frequent flyer miles will be put to good use now that we're both retired. I also want to publicly state, for the benefit of my 2 adult daughters, that I do not and never had a secret family in Japan, which they believe to be true for many years and may still believe to be true. So now, if you'll excuse me, I'm actually being paged. I have to go and fix a leaky index pipe in the FIASI Hall of Fame. Thank you very much.
Steve told me that when the ag started, it was trash, but it was better than nothing. So it's pretty incredible to think about what it has become today. So as you all know, market timing is a damn difficult thing, but our next inductee has shown plenty of good timing his entire career, not least by timing it to start his entire career the week the all-time high in treasury yields was in. It's pretty incredible, right? I hope Bob forgives the earlier joke about his age, being older than the Dutch bond, but I've got one last crack. Here's another example of how old he is. When he first started his career at Bankers Trust, his job was breaking time deposits. And I'm so young that he had to actually explain to me what that even meant, what that was, how do you break a time deposit? Well, interest rates were so high back then and moving around so much that actually paid sometimes to pay the penalty to move money around and put it in a new time account. Obviously, until fairly recently, explaining the idea of high interest rates to people would have been a bit like explaining theoretical physics to goldfish. So I appreciate that Bob explained this to me. But over his illustrious career, there is not a corner of the bond market that he has not been involved in, whether it's rates, credit, ABS, or emerging markets, including UK in that last element as well, because he was based in the UK for a bit. I've certainly enjoyed tapping him for insights many, many times. When I first arrived here in the US, he was absolutely invaluable and incredibly helpful, so I really appreciate that, which is why I'm so pleased to be here tonight. Though I have to say, I did discover through his partner in crime over many years that he did apparently dabble in equities at some point early in his career. So you feel free to boo him for that if you want. He's now overall Chief Investment Officer of JP Morgan Asset Management, and by several accounts, an absolutely fabulous boss. But I think what is really fascinating, credible, is, and really speaks to, frankly, his love and passion for investing, is that he's also head of fixed income still, and still manages money across several major portfolios. And all this for somebody who studied the classics, which I think is pretty great, and as a humanities student, I'm pretty happy about that. But perhaps most importantly, he's a Liverpool fan as well. Sorry about that as well, maybe that's, hasn't always been this fun over the years. But he had the good fortune of marrying up, I gather, to somebody he met at CFA class, which I thought was delightful. I think the CFA should market more often the fact that it's a good place to meet your partners. Might get those membership numbers up again a bit more. But anyway, Bob, I'd love you to come to the stage and accept your award and give us your remarks.
Thank you, Robin. Well, it is true that I studied classics at the University of Pennsylvania, but I went there and studied also biology, chemistry, and physics. So by all accounts, I'm not supposed to be up here. And I know all you guys who work with me are saying, we already knew that. But if things had gone the way I thought my freshman year, I was headed off to medical school and then to become a doctor. This is always a source of enormous amusement to my wife because, one, I faint at the sight of blood, so it's not clear to anyone how I might have gotten through medical school. And secondly, I have absolutely no bedside manner whatsoever, which has come in rather handy for a career in the bond markets, I might add. So without any of the traditional business coursework that you need to get into finance, I headed off to Bankers Trust 42 years ago, but I did have courses in math and sciences, and somewhere the medical profession is rejoicing at their near miss. To be here tonight is genuinely an honor. I'd like to thank FIASI and Mark Howard for their wonderful lack of judgment in letting me slip in this year with two incredibly accomplished and deserving honorees, Steve, who you heard from, and Barbara, who you'll hear from later. And what a treasure to be included in the company of so many true pioneers of our fixed income business, people that I have long admired. Marty Leibowitz, his Inside the Yield Book was my Bible for so many years. And I will tell you, I found my original copy. I've kept it out the last couple months, and I was going to bring it today for him to sign. And then I thought, I can't, because he'll open it up and he'll see that I underlined all the wrong things, and I may not actually get inducted. True story. And of course, JP Morgan's own Joyce Chang, who taught so many of us about the emerging markets and not to be afraid of their debt. Well, maybe just a little bit. Shortly after Mark called me to give me the news, I did run into Joyce, and she told me that her induction was deeply personal, and I'm sorry she's not here today. I didn't realize she had a broken foot. I wonder if she knew that I almost went to medical school, she would have come and I could have patched her up. I'm just saying. But when she said it was deeply personal, I knew immediately what she meant. At some point in our careers, we realize that investing isn't a game. It's not a game where you try to beat benchmarks or competitors. It's not even really a job, and it's certainly not a career path. It's a serious business. It's a privilege to have input into managing somebody else's money. But it also can be a burden, particularly when the markets aren't going your way, and it's always all-consuming. And for that, I thank my family, long-suffering, because they know this all too well. They know the sullen mood swings when the markets are challenging. They know the eternal checking of the markets at dinner, weekends, because who knows what could be happening on a weekend, and on vacations. They know the weeks of travel, and of course, they remember the move to London for that great opportunity, which guess what? 9 and 10-year-old boys don't actually think is such a great idea at the time. It's okay, we promised them it would be 2 or 3 years, and 9 years later, I believe we returned. So an enormous thank you to my wife and our 2 sons. And yes, Robin, you are right, I did meet my wife in CFA Level 1 study group. So the industry has been very, very good to me. I have been fortunate since I started in the business in 1981 to see the development and evolution of so many of our markets. And there are a lot of people here that I know don't go back to 1981, don't even really go back to 1990, maybe not even 2000. So here's a picture of what it looked like back then, and some of what Steve said I remember well. When I started at Bankers Trust in 1981, I was in the trust department. That's where the big mandates were managed. There was this thing that had just started a couple years later. It was called ERISA. Nobody knew whether it would ever gain traction, whether companies would actually put money aside for their employees. All the big money was in the estates and trusts, generally descended out of the robber barons. The bond market at that time was largely US treasuries, it was government agency securities, it was municipal bonds. There were these wonderful things in the treasury market called flower bonds, and yes, fresh out of school, one of my jobs twice a month was to get a pair of scissors and go and start clipping coupons off a bond so they could be sent in. So when you hear clipping coupons, it's an actual thing in the market. The agency mortgage market hadn't been fully embraced. Steve told us that. We had to wait for him to come along and create the aggregate bond index. We all use the government corporate index. And corporate America was still doing most of its borrowing from banks. The few securities that they issued in the public market were largely callable, which created their own sense of issues. What were the tools that we used? Well, we used an HP 12C. I ran into Tom Keene last week, and he proudly showed me that on his iPhone he paid $14.99 to have the HP 12C app with all the chiclets because he couldn't use anything else. Of course we use the Monroe bond calculator, but unlike Steve, who seemed to have access immediately at age 12 to a mainframe, we had to enter it into a spreadsheet. Now, this is 81. This is a couple years before Lotus 123 was created. What was the spreadsheet? Does anyone remember? VisiCalc. There you go. In shockingly rapid fashion, everything changed, and I had a front row seat. US Treasuries were stripped into things called cats and tigers. Corporate America embraced public issuance. and they came out in size. And they figured out if they didn't make everything callable, they'd be able to get better distribution. And Marty can tell you about the high yield market and the emergence of the below investment grade borrower. It was breathtaking how fast that happened. Out of the agency mortgage market sprung collateralized mortgage obligation bonds. The industry learned how to dissect them. All forms of payment streams were pooled and sold, creating what we now know the asset-backed market. The years I was in London, I watched the emergence of the euro bond market, the creation of the euro. And of course, we watched emerging markets become a parallel universe of bonds to the developed markets. I feel a bit like Forrest Gump, that everything happened in this compressed 10-year period of time, and I was there watching it. But unlike Forrest Gump, I want to be clear. I didn't do anything. I never pioneered, developed, or created any of these markets. Not a one, didn't do a god-darn thing. My entire career was in portfolio management, which meant I had to understand the opportunities and risks in each of these markets and each instrument before they went into portfolios. Very early in my career, I learned to appreciate, value, and cherish the research community that rolled up their sleeves, dug through these things, and educated me pretty much on everything. And believe me, I've got some people from our research group over there now saying it's just like that today. So thank you, FIASI, for being that enduring institution that gives researchers and analysts their rightful recognition. I wouldn't be here without them. I've also been very fortunate to have worked at wonderful institutions over the years where I always took away something. It's always amazing to me, and I tell the young people I run across, just look around and observe. You're going to see things people do that make them successful. You're also going to see things that they do that hold them back. And you make your decisions over your career, what you're going to copy and what you're not going to copy. I think back at my 9 years at Brown Brothers Harriman. Gene Reynes, some of you may remember, was the partner in charge of fixed income. He used to get a copy of the Beige Book. Back then, as some of the back tables will remember, it was called actually the Tan Book. As soon as it came out and he read every single line in it, he taught me that every investor should also be a researcher. It's also where I started working with Lisa Coleman, who's been a trusted partner for me in the bond markets for over 30 years. At First Boston Asset Management, derivatives and leverage were heavily used. That's where I ran into Steve Lear, who taught me how to look at them, how to think about the upside and downside, the risks, rewards, and how you use them with the cash market. And like Lisa, he's also remained a trusted partner for me in the fixed income markets for these 30 years. And sadly, for many of us, he's decided to retire and is winding up his career over the next couple months. Whereas Robin, I'm sure it was his signature that you saw on that bond that's 399 years old. The years I spent at BlackRock were a crucible of fixed income learning. The talent and intellectual horsepower there was just simply off the charts. Among the many, many things that I learned there was that the markets had evolved into something incredibly broad and complex, a set of counterparty risks. I ran into Ben Golub earlier, and it reminded me of all of these things. The better that these risks were understood, the better portfolios could be created. And that's one of the things, of the many things I took away from BlackRock, and I continue to think about every day I look at the markets. The 10 years I spent at Schroders took me to London and gave me an appreciation that the bond markets were becoming rapidly global. It's also where I met Ash Williams for the first time, who constantly reminded us that there are real clients, people, who are dependent on the returns that we generate. He also tried to remind us that Tallahassee was the center of the world. None of us believed it. I'm not sure I believe it today. Since 2008, I've been at JP Morgan, which actually I consider to be one of the spiritual homes for fixed income investors. After all, what are bonds? Bonds are loans, and the bond market is effectively a non-bank lender. It's where Lisa, Steve, Ash, and myself now call home. I will always be grateful for the resources that George Gatch, the CEO of Asset Management, Mary Erdos, who runs Asset and Wealth Management, and Jamie Dimon, even though he did drop a 7% Fed funds rate out there, I forgive him for that. He probably forgot this dinner was tonight. He didn't want to rattle us all. But I'm grateful for all the resources and support of their fixed income business that they've given to me. And for the talent that I have such easy access to, people like Joyce Chang, who I can walk up to, and of course, my own beloved fixed income team. Let me close by saying we should appreciate that we work in the finest market on the planet. And I mean that. And I know Robin said something about the equity market, and I get that all the time from Paul Quincy at JP Morgan. But debt can be used to finance anything. Governments, businesses, and households. As a lender, we're not asking any of these borrowers to give us a share of their equity ownership. Keep it. The only thing we ask of them is to pay us back when they're supposed to. As the economy continues to evolve, I'm confident that we will continue to be the leading edge for financial market innovation. I do believe we are the lubrication which keeps the global economy running smoothly. Thank you, FIASI, for this honor and for continuously putting the spotlight on our industry.
There's actually another Hall of Fame inductee that also was going to become a doctor, but decided fainting at the sight of blood was probably a bit of a problem. It was Bill Sharp. Bill Sharp also went to medical school and decided that no, that probably wouldn't work out, and economics was the thing for him. I think we all benefited from that. So our last inductee of the evening would like everybody very much to know that this is a BlackRock clean sweep. A BlackRock hat trick, to use football vernacular, with all three of them having worked there at some point. Now, I'm not sure if everybody really agrees that that is true, given that, Bob, I think you're only there for 3 years, right? And it was 20 years ago. Steve was there, admittedly, for 7. But I've learned from personal experience that disagreeing with Barbara is something one doesn't do lightly. So I'm definitely not going to do it tonight. BlackRock clean sweep. But of course, Barbara didn't just work for BlackRock. She helped found it, shape it into the formidable, gargantuan force it is in finance today. Just think, she, Larry Fink, and a few friends and colleagues, when they founded BlackRock, they were told by an eminent industry expert that the world does not need another bond fund. Were you at that meeting? Yeah. So they just decided to take over the entire investment industry instead. Many of you will have known Barbara from her public policy work, the God's work, especially around the structure of the fixed income markets, of course, or spearheading the stewardship team at what started to become quite tempestuous time. But really, this was the culmination of a pretty remarkable 4-decade career, most of which was spent in and around fixed income. And when I mentioned Barbara's induction to a contact of mine, his one-word response was legend. But not a lot of people know this, but Barbara did actually invent the senior subordinated pass-through structure back when she was at First Boston. Like a lot of financial innovations, it morphed over time and grew into something that, maybe we take too far, but that is the story of markets, it's the story of people, it's what we do. But I have to admit, it must have been exhilarating to be working on all this in the 80s. I feel the decade when the modern bond market really was forged. And it was largely forged by people like Barbara. Today, she's a senior advisor at BlackRock and a board member at companies like Intel and New Look Life. And she has so many awards that, frankly, like if we started listing them today, we'd be here all evening, and I'd probably need a drink. But for me, you'll always be a fixed income trailblazer. And if this isn't our grandmother's bond market, it is because of people like you, Barbara. So please come up and take your applause.
So I should start by saying I am a grandmother. So thank you very much to the FIASI board for inviting me to join the Fixed Income Hall of Fame. When I looked at the previous inductees, I saw people who inspired me early in my career. Dexter Senft, Larry Fink, Lou Ranieri, and of course, Marty Leibowitz, to name just a few. And I'm very excited and honored to join this group. Please join me in offering a hearty congratulations to Bob and Steve, this year's co-inductees and former BlackRock employees. Tonight, I'd like to share a few highlights from my career, as well as lessons that hopefully you can take away. I graduated from Cornell with a BA in economics. I'm not going to tell you the year. At the time, I assumed I would return to school for a business degree or a joint JD MBA. Never thought of medical school. Boy, was I wrong. My first job was at Morgan Stanley in a computer boot camp. So imagine me as a computer programmer. While that was not my destiny, it is where I learned bond math. Morgan Stanley was undergoing a massive transformation from a small boutique to a full-service investment bank. Lots of change and lots of opportunities. When my boss came around and asked for a volunteer to help launch a mortgage trading business, I raised my hand. At the time, I didn't even know that there was a T in the word mortgage. I discovered the benefits. It's true. I discovered the benefits of learning new things by building on the foundation that I had. After attending a few events where First Boston's head of fixed income research, Dexter, was a speaker, I realized it was time to join a market leader. So in 1985, I joined First Boston, which together with Salomon Brothers at the time, shared 80+% market share in mortgage-backed securities. With Larry Fink leading the charge, First Boston had become a powerhouse through innovations such as CMOs. I joined the product development group and soon after became the leader of something called the portfolio products team. Our team worked with issuers to create billions of dollars of CMOs and IOs and POs, and somebody told me REMICs, blast from the past, in a market that was rapidly changing. And I'm happy to say one of the superstars from that team has joined us tonight, Adam. A technical change in the tax code opened an opportunity to create the senior subordinated structure that Robin told you about. I led the team that worked with Home Savings to issue the first whole loan backed securitization using this structure. Home savings had an exemplary record. High underwriting standards, no claims on their private mortgage insurance, and a willingness to self-insure by keeping the subordinated piece, all spelled out clearly in the prospectus. It was unimaginable that this structure would be bastardized 20 years later, with mortgage originators underwriting garbage loans, rating agencies competing for market share in inappropriate ways, and everyone passing the potato as fast as they could. The markets changed while I was at First Boston, very rapidly. Spreads were collapsing in the mortgage securitization business, and in 1987, against this backdrop, the stock market crashed. Wall Street needed to shrink fast. Early the next year, Larry Fink announced he was leaving to start a buy-side firm. So you can think of BlackRock as a dot-com before there were dot-coms. A group of 8 people with a lot of experience in the markets, a deep well of enthusiasm, some great professional contacts, and a vision about risk management, and not much else. We jumped out a window holding hands, and from this, BlackRock emerged. And as they say, the rest is history. I'd like to cite one of my partners, who was a partner from days at First Boston, Ben Golub. You've heard about him from the other speakers. He had the key vision in terms of risk management, and if you haven't bought his first book, there's a new one coming shortly. Looking back, we can see many ways that BlackRock revolutionized the asset management industry, starting with the first days of the firm. First, as a mortgage specialist, when there weren't a whole lot of mortgage specialists. Then, as the creator of the first term trust, something that actually paid your money back. Then, as evangelicals, preaching the importance of risk management to institutional investors worldwide. This was followed by the successful acquisitions to diversify our business along asset class, geographical, and product lines. Along the way, we introduced numerous product innovations, including synthetic GICs. Somebody introduced themselves earlier tonight. They were at Bankers Trust when we did that. I told him it was in the speech. He was very excited. Also, LDI strategies, bond ETFs, and of course the Aladdin trading platform, which has become somewhat ubiquitous. Our vision and enthusiasm were paired with my team's ability to listen to clients and deliver solutions to their problems, the problems most important to them. We could not have succeeded without the support and early adoption by certain plan sponsors and consultants. I'm very happy to say a number of you are here tonight, which is very exciting, and likewise several of our current and alumni BlackRock employees who contributed to those essential first days and early wins are with us as well. As you can imagine, 2008 was a turning point for the entire industry. In the wake of the great financial crisis, BlackRock immediately acknowledged that changes were needed, and we embraced financial regulatory reform. I started the Global Public Policy Group to bring a voice of investors to this process. The group engaged with policymakers literally around the globe, from Washington to London to Brussels to Frankfurt to Hong Kong to Singapore to Sydney to Tokyo, and quite a few more. I might not have seen as many countries as Steve, but my passport needed more pages. In 2009, we established a North Star for our team's efforts, clearly stating we support financial regulatory reform that increases transparency, protects investors, and facilitates responsible growth of the capital markets, with the caveat that it also needed to preserve consumer choice and balance the benefits versus the costs of implementation. Well, you might have noticed, some of you, that we got a lot of press for avoiding a SIFI designation. Anybody notice that? Our team's primary focus was good hygiene in the markets and good outcomes for investors. For example, you may remember the Dodd-Frank decision to move to central clearing for interest rate swaps. Our team supported this change. However, we also flagged the need to segregate the customer collateral. After the MF Global debacle in 2011, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, or the CFTC, voted 4-1 to endorse our solution for protecting customer funds. Along the way, we forged relationships with regulators, legislators, academics, even competitors, sometimes journalists, Robin, as part of our strategy to find practical solutions to real-world policy issues. Our team was proud to bring a voice of investors to these discussions and to have an impact on a host of legislation and regulations around the world. As Robin said in his remark, it's not your grandmother's bond market anymore. One of the services that our team provided was insights into the rapidly evolving markets, from new asset classes such as bank loans, to new electronic trading platforms, to new markets, and ultimately to new products such as bond ETFs. BlackRock's policy team differentiated ourselves by bringing data to the discussions, earning the trust and respect of many policymakers. When the COVID crisis occurred, these relationships were critical to averting a financial crisis on top of the unfolding humanitarian crisis. We brought market insights and suggestions for how to navigate turbulent markets from the perspective of practitioners who are actively engaged in those markets. For example, and Steve, you'll love this example, in March 2020, the Fed and other central banks were trying to provide liquidity to the short-term over-the-counter markets. I realized that every bond index portfolio was going to rebalance at the end of March by selling one-year treasuries that were turning into 11-month treasuries. While no individual fund or portfolio would say they'd have a problem, the collective action across billions of dollars would suck the liquidity out of the exact sector that the Fed was trying to support, undermining their efforts. So working with the index providers and regulators in multiple jurisdictions, our team helped to orchestrate an unprecedented delay in the monthly rebalance. The April balance included a catch-up for March. And my guess is most of the people in this room who are even in fixed income never even realized it. And that was an incredible success. One of the most interesting plot twists that came out of the COVID crisis was the change in perception about bond ETFs. Using actual data, BlackRock was able to show policymakers that bond ETFs were heroes, adding liquidity to the bond markets. This conclusion was in direct contrast to the Armageddon scenario that many policymakers had predicted for bond ETFs as potential villains during a market liquidity event. So yes, Robin, we did win that argument. At one point, someone accused BlackRock's public policy team of epistolary excess. Now I'll ask a show of hands. How many even know what that is? I had to look that one up. It means producing a series of letters. And my reaction, guilty as charged. We're joined tonight by a number of current and alumni members of BlackRock's public policy team, as well as many of our close partners who helped us with data from all different perspectives and arguments, and created that extensive library of viewpoints and comment letters, which have been essential in educating policymakers. So, now that you've heard the Reader's Digest version of my career, I'm going to give you my top 5 career takeaways. 1, seize the opportunity to try something different and learn something new. 2, embrace all sorts of change and turn that change into opportunity. 3, don't be afraid to question. The experts just might be wrong. 4, create a network or a team of people who can provide diverse perspectives and produce better solutions. And 5, Put yourself in the client's shoes and propose solutions and ideas for improvements. Constructive ideas are appreciated. Now, before I wrap up, let me share a few reflections as a woman in bonds who started in early 80s. To put this in perspective, tonight's FIASI event could not have happened in this room when I began my career. Back then, the Union League was male only. And that's okay, because there were no senior women in fixed income or in any other part of Wall Street to induct into the Hall of Fame. We've obviously come a long way. It's not just the bond markets that have evolved. Today, there are hundreds, maybe thousands of senior women at investment banks and investment managers filling many, many different roles. And several women have been inducted into the FIASI's Hall of Fame. It's great to see these inspirational role models for the next generation. So younger women often ask me, how did I juggle a career in finance with having a family? Frankly, I never set out to be a trailblazer. But looking back, I realized that taking it one step at a time turned into a path. So here are my top 5 personal takeaways. And importantly, these apply to all the men in the room as well as the women. So first, establish a support system. You need peace of mind to do your best work. Second, harness technology. There are so many tools available today. I'm actually jealous. Third, prioritize your time. And don't be afraid or embarrassed to invest in yourself and outsource tasks that you don't want to do. Fourth, recognize you can have it all, just not necessarily all at once. And finally, inspire others and reach back as a mentor. You may be surprised at how satisfying that can be for the mentor, not just for the mentee. And I'm personally gratified to see so many of my mentees here in the room tonight. Let me conclude with a giant thank you to clients and consultants who trusted us to manage their money, to policymakers who openly shared their concerns and were willing to consider new ideas, to colleagues with whom I've shared this career journey, and of course, to my husband, Barry, 40 plus years, and my children, who supported me in my crazy career. Without all of you, we wouldn't be here tonight. Thank you.
Wow, what a terrific evening. It's been incredible to be here today. And first of all, I want to thank you, Robin, for being a grand and terrific Master of Ceremonies tonight. You've added a lot to our event. And then thank you for all of you for being here to celebrate Bob, Barbara, and Steve. We're absolutely thrilled to have been able to do this event today to honor these incredible visionaries. Thank you for sharing your personal stories as well as your perspectives from your very illustrious careers. You are absolutely inspiring, and we really thank you for being here and joining the Hall of Fame. So could we give another applause to Barbara, Bob, and Steve? Thank you. We really appreciate your support of FIASI over the many years and look forward to continuing to work with all of you. I would like to thank FIASI for giving me the honor to serve as president for the last 2 years. I've immensely enjoyed working with FIASI board members, many of whom are here today, as well as FIASI members. And it's really been gratifying to see how much we've grown as an organization and encompass hallmark events such as the Women in Fixed Income and the sustainable finance and fixed income, along with our long-running speaker series. And I think one thing that has remained pretty consistent, over these many years, as we gear up to celebrate our 50 years in 2025, is the sense of camaraderie, the sharing of ideas, supporting each other through our professional growth, and really, creating a platform to share independent views, as Mark alluded to when we opened the ceremony today. I'm really excited for the organization to be the go-to place for both seasoned and upcoming professionals in the years to come. And I'm absolutely thrilled to announce the new executive officers that will lead the organization going forward. We have Erin Lyons from CreditSides, who will serve as president. Next to her, Jessica, if you could stand up. Jessica Browden from BNP Paribas, who will serve as vice president. And we are also joined with Pavel Mawkowski from Summit Advisors, who will continue to serve as treasurer. Before we conclude this evening, I'm very excited to announce the President's Awards to someone who has been very instrumental in taking FIASI forward and contributed a lot of time. So please join me in honoring Henry Schilling, who Henry Schilling is a longtime FIASI board member. He's been with FIASI for the last 10 plus years, serving as president from 2015 to 2017. Henry, I would really like to acknowledge you for all the work that you do for FIASI, including the important strategic work we have been embarking upon to position FIASI for the future. I really value how your thoughtful approach around governance and also cultivating the leaders for tomorrow.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. If I can share a few more words, for those that you don't know, Henry has spearheaded and immensely grown our sustainable finance and fixed income programming with 2 very successful events this year. He was also the architect of creating the student research competition that we do with Fordham Gabelli School of Business, and we invited a number of universities, to participate. So if anyone is looking for bright young career professionals to join their ESG platform, please give Henry a call. So Henry, I know all of this requires incredible commitment and time investment, so thank you for everything that you do.
Well, thank you very much. This comes as a complete surprise, Monica. I welcome the acknowledgement. I want to thank you and thank FIASI, the entire FIASI board, for this honor. Thank you.
Thank you, of course. I want to conclude by thanking Mark Howard, our Vice President and Hall of Fame Chair, Lauren Nauser, our Executive Director, the Hall of Fame Committee, as well as everyone at the Union League Club, without which this event would not have happened today. We look forward to seeing all of you at next year's events and at upcoming FIASI events as well. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you for joining us today.